Okay, so obviously you probably remember this car. This is one that had all that massive rear end issues that need to be sorted out. And you can see that we've completely done the floor where it's very difficult to even know that anything has even happened back here. It takes a little bit of time, it takes a little bit of diligence, and it takes obviously a little bit of expense. But at the end of the day, we got a car that's becoming so valuable. These are the little things you got to do to make it worth it. Anyway, some of the things that we also did is that we replicated the resistance welds down here. You can't really see them because of the gloss of the new paint. But what we did is when we welded all this up, we didn't resistance weld this. But what we did do is when we welded it in, we pulled a really thin coat of body filler over here, and then we took an eraser and just turned it in to replicate the resistance weld. The worst thing you can do is make that all executed exactly, because they weren't executed exactly from the factory. They're somewhat random in spacing. Anyhow, so between that and the new fantastic wheels and tire combination on this car, it's starting to look really good. So now we're putting it back together so we can get it out of here. Okay, so these are the 14.7 rims that you can get from really liking these, because these are they're what's called a raw finish. The only thing we do different with them is that we put a little bit of what's called motorcycle clear coat on them. It just to preserve them, because obviously when you get brake dust and all that kind of action on these tires, it'll age it rather quickly, and you may not want that. So anyway, so we put this motorcycle clear coat over it. But the real conversation at hand right now is these Rockstar style tires. These are these tires from Pirelli that are a reproduction of their vintage fill tire. It's a high quality rubber. I haven't really seen these in the States, but these came in from England. They're not that expensive, especially with the dollar to the pound relationship right now, and the shipping was free. So we're going to dig into these because I'm really digging this tire, but I'm loving the fact that this has this vintage look. I know a lot of you love that 15-inch wheel out there that looks just like this, but in 15. And part of the motivation to getting those 15s is because there's more available tire combinations. It's not that there's really a lot of options in the 14s in the first place, but however, if you're going for that more vintage feel and something that's more proportioned to the car, this may be a good place for you to start, because these raw style wheels, which means there's no powder coat, there's no pretty color on them, they're just a raw textured aluminum, looks just like it did when it was the magnesium ones produced. And again, we just clear coated over them with a very matte finish motorcycle engine block clear coat. It's a pretty durable product, and we're liking what we're seeing right now. I'm really excited about putting these on the car, and you'll see what that looks like later. Last time this car ran was 6 years ago, and then it was put in storage. And we're getting ready to get it back on the road, and then we're shipping it overseas where the owner lives. It's really cool to find one of these cars that's been basically unmolested its entire life. This is a European or Canadian spec 69 GTB. This stuff wasn't on the US spec cars, but it runs like a real sewing machine, even down to the original style spark plug wires. So when you bring something back to life, you have to flush everything, and soon nothing is good about it. Change every filter. Anyway, it's up and running, runs like a sewing machine. What do you think of that? Okay, so when we first got this thing back and running, we noticed it didn't have any brake fluid whatsoever. So that's always a mystery because there's nothing underneath leaking. So where did the brake fluid go? There's always one general situation that causes it, and that's the brake booster. If you fire up your car, you're low on brake fluid, and you notice you keep having this sickly sweet smell in the exhaust, and it's kind of smoking and it never goes away, odds are your booster's leaking. The vacuum line, which is right here, comes right off the booster and goes into number 4 effectively on the intake manifold. So it's sucking in brake fluid and the diaphragm's leaking from the reservoir to the booster and into the motor. This is obviously a very dangerous thing. So we took it off. Notice there's a little residue in there. Should be fairly dry and clean inside your vacuum line. Now I'm going to see if the smoke comes when I put it back on the booster. If it comes, then I obviously have brake fluid being siphoned into the intake manifold. There you go. That's about as strong an indicator as you're going to get for a failed brake booster. Now in the past we were just quickly going to replace these, but the boosters that on the reproduction market aren't that great, and we've had some failure rates on them. This one looks to be in pretty good shape. It just needs new diaphragm, most likely that is. So anyway, we're going to order up the parts and rebuild this one instead of buying a new one, which is basically a crapshoot whether it's going to last or if it's even good out of the box anymore. Do both of us a favor. Don't whine about the noise. We are a shop. We have to work. Alright, so what we've done so far is we have taken off the booster. We haven't disconnected anything. We've only loosened up the bolts in the back and taken off the clamp on the firewall. We took the air box and hose out of the way so we can gain access to the elbow. There's a vacuum elbow that's directly under the vacuum booster. First of all, you want to feel it. It feels gummy. It feels like, well, if it feels gummy, that's the first indicator that you probably have brake fluid that's been sitting on that thing for a long time. Basically what happens is when these things start to fail, the seals on the inside start to leak, and when you crank up the motor, this goes into a vacuum like it's supposed to, but it pulls the fluid out of the reservoir and stores it in here. So before we go tearing these things apart, because it's kind of a pain in the butt to put back together, we go for the obvious indicators of what is or possibly wrong. In this particular case, we pulled the vacuum line off. We saw brake fluid remnants in there, so that's an indicator that the seal is leaking. But there's many ways these things can leak and not necessarily end up in here. We have to solve a mystery. The mystery is simple. There is no brake fluid. Brake fluid doesn't evaporate, so therefore it had to have went somewhere. Nothing on the car is leaking. So the only logical place it could be is potentially inside this. Now, if you value the paint job on your car, protect everything you can, because brake fluid will absolutely strip the paint right off. Especially an old lacquer original paint job like this car. Now before I pull this elbow off, which is down here, I'm going to put a container under it, because in theory we filled this up. The rest of the brake fluid that was originally in here has to be somewhere, so it could quite potentially be inside this. So before I remove this clamp and allow this to open up, I'm going to go for the easiest controllable way to find out where the fluid is. I'm going to take off the elbow on the bottom. If you don't know what I'm talking about, believe me, once you look at yours, you'll see a little elbow underneath. Okay? It's a rubber elbow. Handle it with care, because if it's original or fairly old, it will easily break on you. And if your brake booster isn't a problem, now you have to go buy something. So we're going to take it off very carefully and find out if we have fluid sitting inside the bottom of the chamber. Okay, I have a shallow cup that's petroleum protected cup, so if you use like one of those red Dixie cups, be careful, because brake fluid will melt that very quickly. So this is petroleum protected, so you shouldn't have any problems. So I'm going to essentially rest this thing on top of the steering box. I'm going to take a screwdriver and carefully slide down the elbow off of the shaft. Again, I haven't done this yet. This isn't staged. Maybe something in here, maybe nothing in here. If there's something in here, game over. Time to rebuild. And game over. show you what I mean. Okay, so here's the elbow. You saw that, right? That is brake fluid. That should be bone dry at all times. Time to rebuild. No two ways about it. Now, there isn't going to be a tremendous amount coming out from underneath there because, quite frankly, it depends on what side of the booster the leak exists. So right now I have fluid built up on this side because the vacuum elbow is on the back side. The seal in the middle here is not leaking. If it was, there'd be a ton of fluid coming out there. It's only a little bit, so it's probably leaking a little bit. Anyway, when I pop open this canister, when I open this clamshell up, it's going to be gushing out. I bet you there is at least 5-6 ounces of brake fluid here. Alright, so we're just going to pop open the clamshell. If there's any fluid in here, although we already had an indicator when we took the elbow off the bottom, so it shouldn't be much of a surprise. Alright, it's proof in the pudding time. About to bust the thing open and see how much fluid's inside of it. Look at that. Epic fail. Take a picture of that. That's never ever supposed to happen. Ever. Wow, look how much fluid is in there.
You saw the video already of the car running, so he knows where it's at.
Damn. That stuff has been in contact a long time. Never ever supposed to have that much fluid in there. You're not supposed to have any fluid in there. I have not mixed my words in the past when it comes to some of these aftermarket brake boosters, slave cylinders, and things of that nature. If I were to order a replacement unit, not only is it fairly expensive for a complete replacement booster, but it's going to be a poor remanufactured version of the original. I'd rather roll the dice and replace the parts that are worn on what is a pure, it's a clean unit, just that the seals have failed. So, we keep the brake booster rebuild kits in stock, but they're not cheap, and you're not getting a whole hell of a lot for your money. You're getting 3 seals, this, and very small hardware, but you're looking at $100 in parts alone. It's still cheaper to rebuild this than to buy a reproduction model of one of these, which in our experience hasn't proven to last very long. Some of them failed right out of the box, so we'd rather rebuild them. Okay, so as you can see, it's no longer smoking. The booster is most definitely was in really bad shape. Internally, it was just the seals. This car had sat for at least 5 years before it got back on the road. And those seals, when they stay in contact with brake fluid that's not moving, for whatever reason, they start to fail. Now, this is a reproduction model. It's a nice model, but however, it is still a reproduction. And it was installed, 5+ years ago. This particular one was made by Bosch. Anyway, so we replaced all the seals and everything internally to it, and it still failed. Then we went back in there and tore it down completely, which we normally wouldn't do, and then we found metal shavings in the actual cylinder deep down. So the conclusion was that we felt like the seals that were in there were rubbing up against it, creating a pathway for fluid to come out. Now, with that said, we went back and looked at the old seals that were in there. One thing about them, fluid isn't moving, those seals start to break down and become very gummy. Just like the elbow did that was underneath this. So anyway, in conclusion, we rebuilt it. How long it's going to last is hard to say. But it is working, and it's working well.